At my mom's birthday party, she raised her glass, smiled at the whole table, and called me the family embarrassment. People laughed, not because it was funny, because they thought they understood the joke. All I had done was answer honestly. I said I worked at a factory. My mother tilted her head, looked around at her guests, and said, "This dinner is for successful kids." More laughter. Silverware clinked. Someone at the far end of the table muttered, "Oh dear." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just kept my hands folded in my lap. Then the door opened. My cousin Rebecca walked in. We hadn't seen each other in 10 years. She was the kind of woman people noticed immediately. Cream coat, sharp heels, hair that held its shape even in winter rain. The successful cousin, the New York cousin, the one my mother used as a measuring stick every Thanksgiving. Rebecca looked across the room, saw me, stopped cold. Her face drained. "Wait," she said. Then louder, "What are you doing here?" The whole room went silent. Now let me take you back. My name is Erin. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life my family has mistaken quiet for failure. I live outside Columbus. Not in some tiny farm town the way my relatives like to suggest. A working suburb, warehouses, chain restaurants, a school district people argue about on Facebook, a Walmart with a pharmacy line that never moves fast enough, the kind of place people leave if they want to say they've made it, or stay in if they know what stability is worth. I stayed. That became the first accusation. Then I worked with my hands. That became the second. By the time I was 26, the family story about me was already settled. Erin never really had big ambitions. Erin likes simple things. Erin couldn't hack it in the city. None of that was true. But once a family agrees on your role, the truth starts sounding rude. My mother Linda loved polished success. Not actual peace, not reliability, not kindness, visible success, titles, zip codes, photos at rooftop bars, a son-in-law in finance, a daughter in Manhattan, a cousin who works in strategy. Those things made sense to her. A woman in steel-toe boots did not. My father never said much. He mostly let my mother narrate reality for the room. That was his specialty. Passive agreement. My older brother sold commercial real estate in Nashville and had learned how to talk about momentum and opportunities without saying anything specific. My cousins were scattered in New York, LA, Boston. Every family gathering turned into a panel discussion on branding startups, promotion cycles, and neighborhoods that were either hot or dead. Then there was me. I went to community college first, then technical certification. Then I started working at a manufacturing facility 25 minutes from home. Not a dirty, chaotic place with sparks flying everywhere the way people imagine when they hear the word factory. A precision manufacturing plant. Clean floors, strict protocols, advanced machinery. We produce components used in medical devices and industrial systems. Everything is calibrated, measured, documented. If we do our jobs badly, hospitals notice. Supply chains break, millions get delayed. But people hear the word factory and think failure. That misunderstanding has been very useful to me. I never corrected my family. Partly because they never really asked. Partly because I got tired of explaining that work can be physically demanding and intellectually serious at the same time. And partly because my life was already full. My father got sick when I was 23. Nothing dramatic at first. Just one diagnosis. Then another. Then a surgery that was supposed to solve things and didn't. My mother wasn't built for caregiving. She likes events, not maintenance, so I stayed close. Drove him to appointments, picked up prescriptions, handled insurance fights. Went to work after 4 hours of sleep and did it all again the next day. When he got better, I kept staying. By then, I was good at my job. Very good. I moved from quality control into operations, then production planning, then divisional oversight. Not overnight. Quietly, shift by shift, problem by problem, promotion by promotion. No one in my family noticed the difference because they weren't looking for the right things. They saw my old Honda, my practical clothes, my small ranch house. What they didn't see were my savings accounts, my stock options, the bonuses. The fact that I had learned to live well below what I earned, because once you've watched illness hit a family, you stop trusting appearances. By 32, I was making more money than anyone in my family suspected. More than enough. Not billionaire money, not flashy Manhattan money, but the kind of income that buys peace if you know how to use it. I kept my life simple anyway. I paid off my mortgage early. I helped my dad when he needed private rehab support. I funded a scholarship through the local technical school without putting my name on it. I built a life that made sense to me. My mother interpreted all of it as smallness. That was her limitation, not mine. Her birthday dinner happened because she had turned 62 and decided she wanted everyone successful in one room. That was the phrase she used. Not family, successful people. She booked a private room at an upscale steakhouse downtown, white tablecloths, low amber lighting, servers who introduced the specials like they were reading poetry. My brother flew in. Rebecca flew in from New York. 2 cousins drove from Chicago. One aunt came in wearing enough perfume to announce herself before the hostess did. I almost didn't go. I had just finished a brutal quarter-end cycle at the plant. 3 supplier issues, 2 overnight equipment failures, 1 near disaster I had spent 14 hours correcting. I was tired enough that even the thought of family performance made my jaw ache. But my father called me the day before. "Your mother really wants you there," he said. That wasn't quite true. What my mother wanted was a full table, an audience, a photograph she could post. So I went. I wore a black dress I'd had for years. Simple, clean lines, no logo, no spectacle. When I walked in, the room was already warm with voices and wine. My mother kissed the air near my cheek. "Erin," she said, looking me over. "You look practical." There it was. The first little cut. My brother smirked into his bourbon. Rebecca hadn't arrived yet. Traffic from the airport, someone said. We took our seats. The conversation started exactly the way I knew it would. Promotions, office politics, travel schedules, housing markets. A cousin talked about his equity package for 7 uninterrupted minutes. My mother glowed. This was her favorite kind of theater. Then someone turned to me, I think it was my aunt, and asked with the kind of gentle curiosity people use on children and dental assistants, "So, Erin, what are you doing these days?" I took a sip of water. I work at a factory. That was all. That was enough. My mother laughed before anyone else did. Then came the line. Then the table joined in. And then the door opened. Rebecca walked in. And whatever story my family thought they were telling about me that night stopped belonging to them. Rebecca was still standing near the entrance. The hostess had just taken her coat, but she hadn't moved toward the table yet. Her eyes stayed on me. The room had gone quiet in that particular way family rooms do when something awkward appears, and no one wants to acknowledge it. My mother cleared her throat. "Rebecca," she said brightly. "There you are." Rebecca didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the table slowly, still looking at me. When she reached the empty chair beside my brother, she stopped. "You work at the factory?" she asked. Her voice sounded careful, almost cautious. I nodded. "Yes." A few people at the table chuckled again. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "She's exaggerating." Rebecca didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled out the chair and sat down. Then she leaned slightly toward me. Which one? I answered simply. Midwest Precision. That name meant nothing to most people at the table. My brother glanced up from his drink. Never heard of it. Rebecca didn't respond to him. She was still watching me. Her expression was strange, not judgmental, not amused, just focused. Then she sat back slowly. "Interesting," she said. No one understood what that meant. The conversation restarted awkwardly. My mother quickly returned to the safer topic of promotions and travel schedules, but the room felt different now, because Rebecca wasn't participating. She kept glancing at me between bites of her steak, and every time she did something behind her expression tightened. To understand why, you have to understand the way my family tells stories about the past. Every family edits its history. Some polish it, some soften it. Mine simplified it. According to the family version of events, I was the one who stayed behind because I lacked ambition. Everyone else had escaped. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, places with tall buildings and expensive cocktails. The story sounded neat, but neat stories are rarely accurate. The real version was quieter. I stayed because someone had to. My father's first heart attack happened during my second year of community college. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was the kind of event that changes the temperature of a household. Suddenly there were medications, doctor appointments, insurance phone calls, the strange new vocabulary of recovery. My mother handled it the way she handled most stress, by pretending it would solve itself if ignored long enough. She kept planning events, kept hosting dinners, kept talking about the future. But someone had to drive him to cardiology visits. Someone had to sit through rehabilitation appointments. Someone had to understand the medication schedule. That someone was me. At first it was temporary, just a few months. Then the months stretched. My father recovered slowly, and by the time he felt stable again, I had already started working part-time at the manufacturing plant outside town. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well. More importantly, it was stable. Manufacturing doesn't vanish overnight, not when it's tied to medical supply chains. I started in quality inspection, 8-hour shifts, steel-toe boots, hair tied back, measuring tolerances on small components most people never think about. The work was exact, precise. If a piece failed inspection, someone's machine somewhere could malfunction. Maybe in a hospital, maybe in a surgical center. That responsibility changes how you think about work. Within a year, I was training new inspectors. 2 years later, I moved into process coordination. By then, I knew the entire floor. Every machine, every technician, every supplier. I learned quickly because factories reward attention. If you understand the process, problems reveal themselves. If you ignore the process, everything breaks. My promotions came quietly. Title adjustments, salary increases, more responsibility, less supervision. None of it looked impressive from the outside. No corner office, no skyline view. But inside the plant, the work mattered. We produced parts that ended up inside devices used across the country. That kind of accountability builds a different kind of confidence. One my family never noticed, partly because I didn't talk about it, and partly because they had already decided who I was. The girl who stayed, the cousin who never left town, the quiet one, the practical one. At family gatherings, they would sometimes ask polite questions, but not real ones. How's work busy? That's nice. Then they would turn back to discussions about venture funding and relocation packages. I didn't interrupt, because my life was full in ways they didn't measure. My father eventually recovered enough to live normally again, but by then my life had roots. The factory, my house, my routines. The kind of stability that grows slowly and doesn't need applause. Meanwhile, my cousins built their lives in cities. Rebecca moved to New York after business school, consulting first, then corporate strategy. Her name appeared occasionally in articles about industry acquisitions. My mother loved forwarding those links. Look how far she's come. She never said it cruelly, just proudly. The way parents admire what they understand. I admired Rebecca too, but admiration doesn't require comparison. That was something my family never learned. Back at the dinner table, dessert had just arrived. Chocolate torte, vanilla cream. My mother was telling a story about someone's promotion in Boston. Most of the table had relaxed again. Except Rebecca. She still looked unsettled. Finally, she spoke again. "Aaron," she said quietly. "Yes, you said you work at Midwest Precision." "Yes." She paused, then asked the question that made the table fall silent again. Which division? I wiped my hands with the napkin. "Production operations." Rebecca leaned back slowly. Then she laughed once. Not loudly. Just a short breath of disbelief. And that was when I realized something. Rebecca knew exactly what that meant. The rest of the table didn't. But she did. She studied my face for another moment. Then she said quietly, "You should have told them." And I knew the night had just changed direction. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Her fork rested halfway between the plate and the table. She was still looking at me. Not the way someone looks at a relative they barely remember. The way someone looks at a puzzle piece that suddenly fits somewhere unexpected. Around us, the dinner continued in small, awkward movements. My aunt took a sip of wine. My brother checked his phone. My mother smiled too brightly at the waiter bringing coffee. The room was trying to return to normal. But Rebecca wasn't letting it. "You should have told them," she said quietly. My mother frowned, told us what Rebecca didn't answer her immediately. Instead, she asked me another question. "Production operations." I nodded. "Yes." My cousin from Chicago chuckled. "That sounds fancy for factory work." Rebecca didn't laugh. She looked at him for a moment, then back at me. "How long? 8 years." Another silence spread across the table. 8 years. That number meant something very specific to Rebecca. To everyone else, it was just a number. My mother finally set her coffee cup down. "Rebecca, honey, what is this about?" Rebecca exhaled slowly. Then she said something that made my brother sit up straighter. "You realize Midwest Precision supplies half the medical device manufacturers in the Midwest, right?" My brother shrugged. So it's one of the most stable industrial suppliers in the region." He blinked, and Rebecca tilted her head slightly. "And production operations is not an entry-level role." My aunt frowned. "I thought Erin said she works at a factory. I spoke before Rebecca could." "I do." Rebecca nodded. "Yes." Then she added calmly, "But that doesn't mean what you think it means." My mother laughed nervously. "Oh, Rebecca, you know how Erin is." "She's always been humble." I didn't correct her. Humble wasn't the word. Quiet was. Rebecca picked up her napkin and folded it once. Her voice stayed even. "Production operations usually means management." My brother looked at me again. "For a factory, yes." He leaned back. "So what? She supervises a few people." I took a sip of water, more than a few. Rebecca finally turned toward the rest of the table. "Do any of you know how manufacturing supply chains work?" No one answered. Rebecca nodded slowly. "Didn't think so." My mother frowned. "Rebecca, you're making this sound more dramatic than it is." Rebecca's tone didn't change. "I'm making it accurate." My aunt shifted in her chair. "So Erin works a decent job. That's wonderful." Rebecca shook her head slightly. "You're still misunderstanding." My brother rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, Rebecca. Just say whatever point you're trying to make." Rebecca looked at him. "Midwest Precision is one of our primary suppliers." That sentence finally landed. Not fully, but enough to slow the conversation. My brother blinked. "Your company works with them." "Yes." My mother leaned forward. "You mean Erin's factory supplies your company?" Rebecca nodded. "That's one way to put it." My cousin from Chicago laughed. "Well, that's a coincidence." Rebecca looked at me again, not smiling, not dramatic, just very focused. "What exactly do you oversee?" she asked. I answered simply, "Production flow." Rebecca waited. I added quality escalation. She nodded once. "And vendor coordination." My brother frowned. "What does that even mean?" Rebecca spoke before I could. "It means she decides which production lines stay active." My aunt laughed nervously. "That sounds important." Rebecca didn't smile. "It is." My mother waved a hand. "Well, Erin always was good at organizing things." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "You still don't understand." The room grew quiet again. My brother looked irritated. "Then explain it." Rebecca turned her chair toward the table, and for the first time that evening she addressed the entire family. Production operations isn't someone working a station on the floor. She paused. It's the person who keeps the entire system running. My aunt frowned. So, management, Rebecca nodded slowly. Yes. My brother laughed once. So Aaron's middle management at a factory. Rebecca looked at him. No. He smirked. Then Rebecca's voice stayed calm. Senior operations management. The words hung there, still not fully understood. My mother blinked. That sounds impressive. Rebecca didn't respond. She was still watching me. Then she asked the question that finally shifted everything. How many people report to you? I thought about the number for a second. 312. The table froze. No one laughed this time. My brother stared at me. You're joking. No, Rebecca nodded quietly. That sounds right. My mother's face tightened. Aaron, why didn't you ever say that? I shrugged slightly. You never asked. My aunt leaned closer to my mother. 300. My brother sat back slowly. Wait. He looked at Rebecca. You're telling me she runs production at a major supplier? Rebecca met his eyes. Yes. He turned back to me. And you just said you work at a factory? Yes. Rebecca gave a short breath of disbelief. Then she said something that made the entire table stop moving. She doesn't just work there. Rebecca gestured toward me. She's the reason our company didn't shut down a production line last year. My mother blinked. What? Rebecca leaned back. She fixed a supply failure that could have cost us $8 million. No one spoke. The waiter approached with the dessert menu, then quietly stepped away again when he sensed the tension. My brother finally asked the obvious question. How much do you make doing that? I didn't answer. Rebecca did. More than most people at this table. The silence that followed felt completely different from the earlier laughter. This time it wasn't mocking. It was confusion, recalculation. My mother looked at me again. Longer this time. Then she said softly, I thought you were struggling. I met her eyes. I never said I was. Rebecca set her napkin down. Then she looked around the table and said the one thing that none of them had expected to hear that night. You all thought she was the embarrassing one. She paused, then added quietly, but Aaron is the most powerful person in this room. The word powerful hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Rebecca hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't tried to embarrass anyone. She had simply said it the way someone states a fact that can't be argued with. But the effect on the table was immediate. My brother stopped tapping his glass. My aunt slowly set down her fork. My mother looked at me in a way I hadn't seen before. Not with pride. Not yet. With calculation. It's a look people get when a story they've believed for years suddenly starts to feel unreliable. No one laughed anymore. Rebecca leaned back slightly and took a sip of water. She didn't look triumphant. If anything, she looked uncomfortable. Like she had just opened a door she hadn't meant to open. My mother spoke first. Her voice sounded softer than before. Aaron, yes, you run. Production, I manage it. For that whole facility. Yes. She blinked several times. My brother recovered faster. He leaned forward again, elbows on the table. So, your management? Yes. And you make... What exactly? I didn't answer. Not because it was a secret. Because the number didn't matter. Rebecca answered instead. Enough. My brother looked at her. Enough for what Rebecca didn't break eye contact. Enough that none of you should be laughing. My aunt shifted in her chair. Well, that's wonderful for Aaron. She smiled in the careful way people do when they realize they've misjudged something. I always knew she was capable. That wasn't true. But no one challenged her. My mother took a deep breath. I had no idea, she said. I thought you were... You know. She didn't finish the sentence. But everyone at the table knew what she meant. Struggling, stuck, small. I nodded once. I know. The waiter returned with the dessert tray. Chocolate cake, cheesecake, lemon tart. No one touched any of it. Rebecca folded her hands on the table. Then she turned to me. You're still at the Columbus plant? Yes. She shook her head slowly. I cannot believe you never told me. We haven't spoken in 10 years. That's exactly my point. The room quieted again. Because Rebecca wasn't speaking to the table anymore. She was speaking to me. My brother cleared his throat. So you and Rebecca work together now, Rebecca answered without looking away from me. No, but we rely on her facility. My mother frowned. What does that mean? Rebecca sighed softly. It means if Aaron's plant stops production, our company loses a major supply line. My brother leaned back again. And that affects you how Rebecca gave a small, humorless smile. It affects my job. That was the first time anyone at the table understood the connection. The successful New York cousin, the quiet factory worker. They weren't in separate worlds. They were part of the same system. My aunt blinked. So Aaron helps your company. Rebecca nodded. More than once. I looked down at my glass. I didn't need this conversation. I had never needed it. But once a family decides you're the small one correcting them, always feels awkward, like you're bragging. Rebecca seemed to sense that. She turned toward the rest of the table. Last winter our surgical component line nearly shut down. No one spoke. We had a materials failure. My brother frowned. Meaning, Rebecca answered patiently. It meant hospitals were about to stop receiving devices. My mother leaned forward. That sounds serious. It was. Rebecca looked at me again. Aaron fixed it. The table stayed quiet. My aunt finally asked how Rebecca smiled slightly. You should ask her. Everyone turned toward me. I felt the familiar pressure of attention. But this time it felt different. Less judgment, more curiosity. I shrugged lightly. We restructured the line. My brother frowned. You just fixed it. It took 3 days. Rebecca nodded. 72 hours. My aunt blinked. And that saved your company, Rebecca answered calmly. It saved a lot more than that. The room went still again. My mother looked at me carefully, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. I wish you had told us, she said quietly. I met her eyes. You never asked. That sentence settled into the space between us. Rebecca pushed her chair back slightly. Then she stood. Excuse me, she said. She stepped away from the table and motioned toward the hallway. I knew she wanted to talk privately. I followed her. The restaurant hallway was quieter, just the low hum of kitchen activity in the distance. Rebecca turned toward me, and for the first time that night her expression softened. You really didn't tell them anything she said? No. Why? I leaned against the wall. Because it didn't matter. Rebecca studied my face. Then she said something that surprised me. They told me you hated me. I straightened slightly. What? Rebecca nodded. For years. They said you thought I was fake. The hallway suddenly felt colder. I never said that. I know that now. Rebecca crossed her arms. They told me you were jealous. I shook my head slowly. I wasn't. Rebecca looked almost relieved. Good. She glanced back toward the dining room. Then she said quietly, You should know something. What? Rebecca met my eyes again. They only respect you now because of your job. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said the only honest thing that came to mind. That says more about them than me. Rebecca nodded slowly. Yes, it did. The hallway smelled faintly of roasted garlic and coffee. Dinner service was still moving inside the restaurant. Plates clinked. Waiters passed by with quiet efficiency. Rebecca stood across from me with her arms folded. Neither of us spoke for a moment. 10 years is a long time to go without speaking to someone you once knew well, especially when that silence wasn't actually yours. They told me you hated me, she said again. I leaned against the wall and let out a small breath. I didn't. I figured that out eventually. Rebecca glanced toward the dining room again, then back at me. You know what the strange part is? What I believed them for a long time. That didn't surprise me. Families are very good at shaping stories, especially the ones that keep everyone comfortable. They said you thought I was arrogant, Rebecca continued, that I looked down on everyone here. You were successful, I said. Rebecca gave a small shrug. That's not the same thing. No. She studied my face for another moment. Then she laughed softly. You know the weird part. What I thought you were the one who stopped talking to me. I blinked. That's what they told you. Yes. Rebecca shook her head slowly. They said you didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. That part at least made a kind of sense. If someone disappears from a narrative long enough, people start filling in the blanks. I didn't stop talking, I said. I just stopped arguing. Rebecca's eyebrows lifted slightly. That sounds like you. We both smiled faintly. Then the silence returned again. The kind that happens when two people realize how many years were built on misunderstandings. Rebecca finally broke it. You know what else they told me? What that you were struggling. I laughed quietly. They've been saying that since I was 22. Rebecca nodded. I know. She leaned against the opposite wall. My mother said you stayed here because you couldn't handle real competition. That sounded exactly like something my aunt would say. Rebecca exhaled slowly. I didn't question it at the time. You were busy. Yes. Her voice softened slightly. New York is loud. Busy people believe the loudest stories first. Rebecca nodded. That's true. We stood there another moment. Then she asked the question that had probably been forming in her mind since she walked into the restaurant. Why didn't you ever correct them? I thought about that. Because it was a fair question. But the answer was simple. I didn't need them to understand. Rebecca tilted her head. You didn't care. I cared about different things. Like what stability? She nodded slowly. That's a word people in New York forget exists. I smiled slightly. Factories remember it. Rebecca laughed under her breath. I believe that. Her expression shifted again. More serious this time. Do you know how many times your plant saved our production schedule? A few. Rebecca shook her head. More than a few. She looked at me carefully. You're one of the most reliable suppliers we have. That's the job. No, she said quietly. That's leadership. The word felt strange in that hallway. Not because it was wrong, because it had never mattered much to me. Rebecca continued. I run strategy for our medical division. I know. You do. I read industry reports sometimes. Rebecca laughed softly. Of course you do. Then she gestured back toward the dining room. They think success means living in Manhattan. They always have. Rebecca's voice dropped slightly. But they don't understand how the system actually works. I waited, she continued. The hospitals, the suppliers, the production chains. She looked directly at me. People like you keep all of it running. I didn't respond. Compliments have never been comfortable for me. Rebecca seemed to notice. She changed the subject slightly. You know they're going to start treating you differently now. Probably. My voice stayed calm. Rebecca watched my reaction closely. You don't seem excited about that. I'm not. Why? Because it's conditional. Rebecca nodded. Yes. That was exactly the word. Respect that appears only after money enters the conversation isn't really respect. It's recalculation. Rebecca straightened from the wall. Then she said something that sounded almost like a warning. They're going to rewrite the story now. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean they'll say they always knew you were capable? That sounds familiar. Rebecca smiled slightly. Families do that? Yes. She glanced toward the dining room again, then back at me. But there's one thing they still don't understand. What's that? Rebecca paused. You didn't stay here because you had to. No, you stayed because you chose to. I nodded. Yes. Rebecca looked thoughtful. That's harder than leaving. Sometimes. She pushed herself off the wall. We should go back in. Probably. But before we walked toward the dining room, Rebecca stopped. She looked at me again. Serious this time. You know they'll expect something now. What success? I smiled faintly. They already have it. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Do they? I opened the dining room door. The noise returned instantly. Conversation, glasses, laughter. But it sounded different now. Quieter, more cautious. Rebecca followed me inside, and as we walked back toward the table, she leaned slightly closer and said one last thing. You may not care what they think. She paused. But tonight they're finally starting to understand who you really are. When we walked back into the dining room, the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't loud anymore. It was careful. The kind of careful people adopt when they realize they might have misjudged someone important. My brother straightened slightly when we returned to the table. My mother looked up immediately. Her eyes moved from Rebecca to me and back again. Well, she asked. Rebecca took her seat slowly. Well, what? My mother gave a nervous smile. You two looked very serious out there. Rebecca reached for her glass of water. We were just catching up. My brother leaned forward. About the factory, Rebecca gave him a small glance. About a lot of things. The waiter appeared again to clear dessert plates. No one had eaten more than a few bites. My aunt folded her napkin neatly. So Aaron runs production now. It sounded less like curiosity and more like an attempt to adjust the narrative. Rebecca didn't correct her. She oversees operations. My brother whistled softly. 300 employees, right? I nodded once. Yes. My mother leaned forward slightly. That must be very stressful. Her tone had shifted again. Less dismissive. Almost sympathetic. I recognized the pattern. Once people realize you're successful, they begin treating your struggles like accomplishments. It has its moments, I said. Rebecca studied the table quietly. She was observing something, watching how everyone recalculated their position in the room. My cousin from Chicago leaned toward me. So you're basically the boss of that whole facility, not the boss. Close enough. I didn't correct him again. Rebecca finally spoke. You know what the interesting part is? Everyone looked at her. Aaron never mentioned any of this. My mother gave a soft laugh. She's always been modest. Rebecca shook her head slightly. That's not modesty. My brother frowned. Then what is it? Rebecca met his eyes. Privacy. That word landed differently. Because privacy implies choice, not failure, not limitation, choice. My aunt tilted her head. Well, I suppose Aaron just didn't want attention. Rebecca gave a small smile. I think she didn't need it. The table grew quiet again. My mother looked down at her hands. Then she said softly, I may have been a little hard on you earlier. The understatement of the evening. I didn't answer right away, because apologies disguised as observations rarely need responses. Rebecca watched me carefully. Then she leaned slightly toward the table. You all know something funny. My brother sighed. Rebecca, please don't start lecturing. I'm not. She gestured toward me. Aaron and I work in the same industry. My aunt looked surprised. You do, Rebecca nodded. Our companies rely on the same supply chains. My brother blinked. So you two have probably crossed paths before. Rebecca laughed softly. Many times. I raised an eyebrow. You never mentioned that. You never asked. The room fell silent again. My mother looked confused. Wait, you mean you've known about Aaron's job for a while? Rebecca shook her head. Not exactly. Then she explained. A year ago we had a production emergency. My brother leaned forward. The one you mentioned earlier, Rebecca nodded. Yeah. She turned slightly toward me. Our surgical line was about to shut down. I remembered the situation clearly. 3 defective batches from a secondary supplier, a chain reaction through multiple hospitals. Rebecca continued. Someone from operations stepped in and reorganized the production flow. She looked directly at me. That someone was Erin. My aunt gasped softly. You mean she saved your company? Rebecca shook her head. No, she saved the hospitals waiting for those devices. The room went completely still. Even my brother didn't interrupt this time. My mother looked at me again, this time with something new in her expression. Not pride, not exactly regret, something closer to confusion, like she was trying to understand how the quiet daughter she had underestimated had built a life she didn't recognize. Rebecca broke the silence again. You know what the ironic part is? My brother groaned slightly. What now? Rebecca leaned back in her chair. For years I thought Erin hated me. The table reacted immediately. My aunt gasped. That's ridiculous. Rebecca shrugged. That's what I was told. My mother frowned. Who told you that? Rebecca looked around the table, then gave a small smile. Does it matter? No one answered. Because everyone already knew. Families often create rivalry stories, especially between women, especially when success becomes a competition. Rebecca continued. I thought Erin avoided me because she didn't respect what I did. I shook my head. I never thought that. Rebecca nodded. I know that now. She looked around the room again, but it took 10 years to figure it out. My brother shifted uncomfortably. Well, that's unfortunate. Rebecca smiled slightly. Yes, it is. Then she turned back toward me. And for the record... She paused. You were never the embarrassing one. No one spoke. Not my mother, not my brother, not even the cousins who had laughed earlier. Because suddenly the entire narrative of the evening had flipped, and everyone at the table knew it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The way truth tends to arrive when people finally stop talking. Rebecca took a sip of water. Then she added one more sentence. You were just the only one here who never needed their approval. The silence at the table didn't break immediately. Rebecca's sentence settled into the room like a weight no one had prepared for. You were just the only one here who never needed their approval. My mother looked down at the white tablecloth. My brother shifted in his chair. Even my aunt, who normally filled silence with nervous chatter, stayed quiet. Because everyone at that table understood something simple in that moment. The story they had been telling about me for years had just collapsed. Not loudly, quietly. Rebecca reached for her napkin and folded it carefully. Then she turned to me again. You know what the strange part is? She asked. What you built a life none of them noticed. I shrugged slightly. They weren't looking. She nodded. That's true. My mother finally lifted her head. Her voice sounded softer than it had all evening. Erin? I didn't realize. I met her eyes, I know. She hesitated, then tried again. I thought you were struggling. I didn't answer immediately. Because sometimes people confuse misunderstanding with innocence. Finally, I said I never said I was. My brother leaned forward again, trying to recover his earlier confidence. So, you're doing well? Yes. And you're happy working there? Yes. He glanced at Rebecca. Factories don't usually pay that well. Rebecca gave him a look that suggested she had lost patience hours ago. Operations directors do. My brother blinked, then he turned back to me. You're an operations director, senior operations. That landed again. Another quiet recalculation. My aunt spoke carefully. Well, that's very impressive. Rebecca shook her head slightly. No. Everyone looked at her. What do you mean? My mother asked. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. What's impressive isn't the title. She nodded toward me. It's that she built it without any of you noticing. The room stayed still. My brother exhaled slowly. So, Erin's successful. Rebecca smiled faintly. She's been successful for years. I picked up my glass of water. My hands were steady. Because none of this actually changed my life. It only changed the way my family understood it. My mother looked at me again. Longer this time. Then she said something that almost sounded like regret. I wish you had told us. I met her eyes. You were busy listening to other stories. Rebecca gave a quiet laugh. That's very accurate. My brother ran a hand through his hair. Well, this has been enlightening. The sarcasm had mostly disappeared from his voice. Next time, maybe you should mention things like this earlier. I smiled slightly. Why? So we don't embarrass ourselves. I considered that. Then answered honestly. You weren't embarrassing yourselves. My mother frowned. What do you mean you were showing what you value? Rebecca nodded slowly. Exactly. No one argued with that. Because arguing would require admitting something none of them wanted to say out loud, that their idea of success had always been shallow. My aunt tried to change the mood. Well, at least everything worked out nicely. Rebecca shook her head. No. Everyone looked at her again. She spoke calmly. It didn't work out nicely. It worked out honestly. That sentence lingered in the room. My mother reached for her wine glass, then stopped. Erin. Yes, I may have been unfair. The apology came slowly, like something unfamiliar. I didn't rush to accept it. Instead, I said something simple. We all believe the stories we're told. Rebecca smiled slightly. That's the real lesson tonight. My brother stood up suddenly. Well, he looked around the table. I think this evening took an unexpected turn. That was one way to describe it. My aunt laughed nervously. You can say that again. Rebecca pushed her chair back. Then she looked at me. Are you heading out soon? Probably, she nodded. I'll walk out with you. My mother looked surprised. You're leaving already, Rebecca shrugged lightly. Early meeting tomorrow. That wasn't entirely true, but neither of us felt like staying. The waiter brought the final bill. My brother grabbed it automatically. Rebecca glanced at him. You don't need to perform anymore. He flushed slightly. But he paid anyway. Some habits are difficult to abandon. Rebecca and I walked toward the exit together. The restaurant lobby was quieter now. Outside, the night air felt cool and clean. Rebecca slipped on her coat. Then she looked at me again. You know something, she said. What they'll talk about this night for years. Probably. She smiled. But the story won't be the one they expected. I nodded. No. Rebecca opened the door. Then she paused. By the way, what? The factory you run. Yes. Our company just approved a new expansion contract. I raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Rebecca laughed softly. It wasn't fast. It was overdue. She stepped outside. Then she added one last sentence before heading toward the street. You were never the embarrassment. You were just the one doing the real work. The parking lot was quiet when Rebecca's car pulled away. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool night air.